All right. Hello, Aries. Welcome to your July 2026 horoscope. So I'm seeing a pretty specific interplay of energies here that I'm finding pretty interesting. So first off, there's quite a bit of tension around the idea of just identity in general. There's a certain persona or like a character that you sort of developed through your early life, and there may be a slow realization that this sort of character, this persona that you've really kind of stuck to, may have been more of the product of the people that you were spending time around rather than an expression of just who you truly are. There's more of like your true self is kind of emerging more and more over time, and that transformation can be a little bit, it's an uncertain time, it can be a little bit unsettling in some ways. This it's foreign. You're kind of coming into this new sense of self, and when you change on that deep fundamental level, there's no like reference point for that kind of change. It's when you I like to use the example of like skydiving. So say when you go skydiving, it's a really intense, crazy experience. I've never done it, but I imagine it's pretty exhilarating. But even in that scenario, you still have a point of reference. That is a plane, this is a parachute, I am falling down, that is the ground. Like there's at least context to know what you're doing. But when it comes to changes on your like fundamental level of your psychology and of your sense of self, like a change in consciousness, there's nothing else that really feels like that. There's no way to really describe it exactly. And so it feels kind of alien. So there's some of that going on. And I'm reminded. I used to have a friend, two different friends actually, who were Aries people when I was in like high school in my early 20s. One of them was extremely dedicated to looking like Kurt Cobain, and the other one was extremely dedicated to being like Marilyn Manson. They were both obsessed. They kind of had like a character that they kind of modeled themselves after, and later in life they started to kind of change as they started to spend time with different people or have different interests, kind of grow out of it. But just as an example of like Aries tends to have like you pick an identity and you really stick to it, and like a unique characteristic. But there's also a sense with Neptune here in the first house that there's a feeling of not being entirely sure like how others are perceiving you at this point. Like you just can't quite tell what others are thinking of you or how they see you at this point. Um, and even if it's something you're not particularly always concerned with, it's still a little bit weird. Like people's reactions to you don't seem to always make a whole lot of sense. They leave you wondering like what was that about. Um, and it seems that in the last couple of years, at some point you may have, oops, that's a big circle. You may have inherited a new friend group from another person who you might be close to. So with Pluto here next to Juno, so you may have inherited a new social circle, either from your romantic partner or a close friend who introduces you to other people. It's not the same. You're going through a change in your social circle, and this change in your social circle kind of changes the way that you feel like you identify, like the person that you feel you want to be to relate to these new connections. So, and maybe you're feeling like these new connections, these new people, they don't quite. It's like the person that you sort of grew up to be, the character, the identity, the persona you developed. It just isn't quite meshing with this new group. It just doesn't quite seem to feel like it fits. And then there's a question of like, well, am I changing myself because I just want to please them, or is this really like, am I changing because that's just who I really am? And I think you may end up finding that the surface level sense of self is can be changed pretty easily. I mean, it's not easy at first, but it can be changed. It's like an outfit, It's not really who you are. It's just a way of interacting with your immediate environment. While the real true self is adaptable, it can change. There are qualities that will never change that are your truly who you are. And then some of the things on the surface are kind of like it's not a big deal to kind of shift things around a little bit. And one of the things maybe driving this sort of feeling of a mismatch, there is a little bit of an energy of like keeping up with the Joneses here in the second house with this Mars and Uranus in the second house. So that's an intense drive, like a very intense drive, or maybe even anxiety, maybe even a little bit of frustration revolving around money and your overall like sense of like your career or like public persona. Maybe these new people that you've been encountering, they're a little less like free spirited kind of wild kind of people maybe, and tend to be maybe a little more buttoned down, and some of them are more creative, or more like work oriented, career oriented, where maybe in the past you spent more time with kind of more creative, wild card types. And so, like I said, there's kind of a feeling of a mismatch of these different of this identity and these people that you are now you I think want to be part of. Like I think you like these people, and you're not changing because you feel like they're making you change. There's a desire to change in certain ways. It's natural to kind of outgrow old identities. Actually, it's a good thing. And we've all met some people who are in their 60s or 70s who still act like the same person they were when they were like 14. um, so this is a good thing. And on an even deeper level, this kind of character, this person that you sort of developed, you grew up to be, I really get the sense there was just like a feeling like you kind of had to be, or maybe you wanted to be, just kind of the wild card, be kind of free spirited and goofy and funny and sociable and like kind of, Aries has that go, go, go kind of personality. But in a weird way, with Mercury retrograde down here in the fifth house in Cancer next to Jupiter, um, that might have actually been rooted in a sort of childhood survival strategy. I don't know what kind of circumstances specifically would make a child feel like that's the kind of persona they need to have in order to be like to have their needs met. There's like a certain person. When you're a kid, you interact with your parents and you kind of adapt to them based on how they react to things, because that's just what children do when you're really young. And then you sort of develop these beliefs, these patterns about who you need to be or what you need to do in order to have your needs met. And then later on in life, as an adult, you start to become aware of these patterns because they seem to not really serve you as well as they did when you were a kid. But they're so deep, they're so fundamental to your experience of yourself that you like don't even really notice that there's anything there. It's just a normal feeling until you start kind of noticing where this level of yourself starts getting kind of agitated and poked at, and feels uncomfortable. Um, if you haven't watched my video on Mercury retrograde that I posted recently, it kind of gets more in detail about why I would see it as like this childhood survival strategy type thing. That's kind of the main theme of this Mercury retrograde, and how that expresses itself is going to differ for every sign. But if you want to get more into like that dynamic that I described there, go check out that video. Now, there may also, at the same time, be a little bit of a little bit of isolation, maybe feeling, with the sun in the fourth house down here in Cancer, that can be spending a lot of time at home. And for some people, because Virgo right here is what's called intercepted. You see, it's kind of the house cusps are kind of completely missing. Like there's nothing is landing inside of Virgo except as part of fortune, but that's for something else entirely. And then on the opposite side, Pisces also is intercepted, so it's not. It's almost as if those energies are missing from the reading. And so in some cases, this could mean unemployment, or being a stay-at-home parent, or a stay-at-home uh, whatever. Or in some cases, it just maybe means that you're sort of feeling disengaged or dissatisfied with your work. And this may be leading to a bit of a feeling of like feeling a little isolated and being somewhat cut off from being social all the time. That's kind of where this sense of like wondering how you kind of fit in different in relation to others, like this feeling like you don't quite get how people are seeing you anymore, that can kind of start to develop when you spend a lot of time alone. But you're sort of in a cocoon phase here, with the North Node in the 12th house in Pisces. A bit of isolation, spending some time alone, and really digging into these sort of fundamental, like subconscious layers of your sense of self is kind of what you're supposed to be doing right now. So you're doing some deep inner work, but in that situation, so if you are unemployed, or just dissatisfied with your work, maybe this new friend group who maybe are people who are really maybe wealthy, and they're just kind of a different type of group that makes you feel like you want to aspire towards different things. And then there's kind of it brings up this sense of like feeling like you're not doing enough and career wise or towards money. But and because there's that tension, this feeling like you're not doing enough, uh, when it comes to work and career and stuff, being kind of isolated, going through this weird shift in your sense of how you relate to people, it makes it so that it's hard to just let go and relax and slow down and just accept the situation you're in as something that is necessary. There's kind of a being on the edge of your seat, feeling like you really need to go and make stuff happen, but then the universe kind of keeps forcing you to sit still and be in one place and like really look inward. So the more you can accept that this is supposed to be happening, you're sort of in a cocoon phase and that it won't last forever. In fact, the North Node's going to move into Aquarius over the next few months. And that's when things will shift from being all about, letting go and letting go of all these old patterns of the past, and you start getting more into uh, like like techniques, specialized knowledge. Aquarius kind of tends to represent these like working out a system of some kind or a hobby or a technique to a high degree. And so there's going to be a lot more hands-on activity coming up in the near future. But right now, it's mostly about this shift in identity and your sense of self. And as we go on to let me click over to the next, that's the wrong chart, this one here. So at the end of the month, July 31st to the 1st, we can see that Neptune and Saturn are now in retrograde. So those effects of like that um, kind of almost clinging to the past, or our sense of familiarity and that feeling of uncertainty about how you fit, that's going to really loosen up. Things start to become more clear. There's more of a ease and just of letting go of the past and not kind of subconsciously clinging to um, a familiarity, a familiar sense of self, being more willing to explore new aspects and sides of yourself, maybe being a little more open in how you communicate, although maybe still also try. There's a sense of wanting to sort of tame the Aries go 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 kind of energy, like wanting to chill out a little more, come across a little more like stable and grounded, and not just fun and interesting. Because Aries does tend to be very fun and interesting and adventurous, but I think you're wanting to chill out a little bit on that. um, but anyways, we'll get into this next chart here for next month's reading when we get to that. Um, so I think we'll go ahead and call it quits here. So go ahead and check out my website if you're interested in booking a reading. Remember to hit like and subscribe, leave comments. It always helps with the algorithm. And take care. I'll talk to you again next time.